Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the very first in a series of our skills webinars. My name is Antonia Kende, and I'm the head of content for our skills community. So today we'll be joined by techUK, Network Rail, the ESFA, and MakeUK. Just before I hand over to Nimmi Patel, just a couple of housekeeping rules here. So you'll notice at the bottom of the bar that there's a Q&A functionality, so please do send in your questions. We'll endeavour to weave them in throughout the discussion. Otherwise, we'll allow for 10 minutes to take your questions. So without much delay, I'd like to hand over to Nimmi to start us off. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us this morning. So according to the Bank of England, the UK unemployment rate is set to double this year and the economy is set to shrink by 14%. As we move from this public health crisis to business, I guess, as unusual, today's panel will explore how the world of business is responding and how the current pandemic has affected the future of skills and employability. We are today joined by Shirley, Employment Development Network at Network Rail, Greg Dean, Head of Large Employer Engagement Strategy at the Education and Skills Funding Agency, and Tim Thomas, Director of Research and Development at MakeUK. I'm Nimmi Patel, I'm the Policy Manager for Skills, Talent and Diversity at techUK, and I will be your chair for this session. Please do join in the conversation by asking questions via the chat function, and do feel free to tweet or post on LinkedIn tagging at GE Skills and hashtag Skills2020. Chris, can I bring you in first?
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute this morning. I'm Shirley. I'm the Apprenticeship Services Manager at Network Rail. So my role within Network Rail is to lead on our apprenticeship strategy. And I am also accountable for the delivery of training at our residential training centres, manage our contracts and quality, of our apprenticeship programs. So in effect, I'm kind of accountable for everything up to the point of delivery, at which point I hand over to my colleagues who then deliver apprenticeship training for our employees and for our new starters. I've been asked to talk today specifically around skills gap and employability, so not necessarily specific to Network Rail, although I will link that in, but towards the impact of COVID on the skills gap and within industry in general. I spoke at a webinar a couple of weeks ago and presented this idea of we're about to hit, or we are in the process of hitting a perfect storm of challenges. And I'm going to break that down into three key areas, which are all interlinked. Firstly, we have an ageing workforce, and we know that we have an ageing workforce across the UK. If we look at the reports, megatrends that published by the CIPD in October last year, we have got over 32% of our workforce is over the age of 50. Of that, we can then look at several different sectors. Hospitality has an average age of 34. Our primary industries have an average age of 47, and health, retail, education and manufacturing combined, they actually hold 50% of the total workforce that is over the age of 50. If I relate that to Network Rail in particular, we have a workforce over the age of 50 of just over 40%. So we have got an ageing workforce. We've got a lot of expertise at that end of the age demographic. First thing that COVID may lead to, and that concerns me, is that for those long-serving employees whose pensions may well be paid up and are working because they choose to work, not because they have to work, the impact of COVID may result in that cliff edge of retirements, which many of us are worried about and aware of, but has never really materialised. We may now see people making a life decision that now is the time to step away and retire. So we may see, as part of the COVID impact, that we will lose our expertise at the older end of our age demographic. So that is challenge number one when it comes to skills. Second challenge we have is that COVID is going to drive undoubtedly us into recession. How long that lasts is up for debate, but we are already beginning to see organisations announcing redundancies, announcing restructures. And if we look at the likes of BP's announcement yesterday of 10,000 workers, BA are looking at significant layoffs in hospitality. So we're looking at recession. Now, we know also that recession has an impact on our early career pipelines and how we bring people in the industry. Research from the ISC this year shows that in 2020, graduate intakes are down by 12%, apprenticeship intakes are down by 32%, and interns and placements are down 40% compared to last year. So again, linked in with the COVID, at one end, we are seeing potentially exit of expertise at one end of the age demographic. At the other end, we are seeing less expertise and less talent coming in to our industries and our businesses. So by definition, that means that less people in, more people out, our skills gap is going to widen where we are now. Now, historically, one of the solutions for mitigating skills gaps has been to recruit and take advantage of the labour markets from overseas. And this is where we get to this third part of this perfect storm. It's kind of taken a little bit of a back seat, but the challenges around Brexit and a no-deal exit or a deal exit, whatever that looks like, are still real, and this month is a key part of that. But where things stand at the moment is that we could find our access to overseas talent pools seriously restricted in the not too distant future. Currently, the threshold for employment in terms of salary is that somebody who wants to migrate into the UK will need to have a salary of £30,000 a year. Now, they're looking at dropping that to 25,600, but at the moment, it is still at that £30,000 mark, which could make it difficult to bring in the right skills in the right areas to start filling the gaps that we are seeing. So from my point of view, to kind of start off this discussion and start off this webinar before I hand over to my colleagues, it's about thinking about those three things. We have got COVID, which could impact us at the end with our most experienced people. We have got COVID and recession that is going to impact bringing new people into the business. And then we have got the potential impacts of Brexit, which will stop us at accessing where we have normally topped up our expertise levels. So COVID-19 undoubtedly changing the way we are living in the here and now. We are probably talking to our friends and family more than we've ever done before via Zoom and House Party and Messenger and all of those good things. But we can't take our eye off the ball that we might stumble into a significant skill shortage whilst we're enjoying spending more time with our families. We could stumble into a significant skills shortage, more severe than that has been anticipated. Higher unemployment rates in first-time job seekers, higher retirement rates, less access to foreign labour pools could mean that our new normal, in inverted commas, could be with us for some time to come.
Thanks so much, Chris. You've given us a lot to think about, and we'll definitely be picking up some of that as we go along. Greg, I was wondering if I could bring you in now.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Brilliant. So shall I just introduce myself and explain what I do?
Yes, please. That'd be great.
Okay, fantastic. So my name's Greg Dean. I'm currently head of employer service strategy within the Education Skills Funding Agency, which is an executive agency of the Department of Education. I work in the apprenticeships department in a division that primarily works on employer engagement. Currently, we are communicating our guidance out in terms of apprenticeships to employers, either through our account managers, via our National Contact Centre, or by direct mail. We're also keen, as well as actually getting the communications out, to actually bring insight back in from these employers, we want to ensure that our policy colleagues hear the voice of the employer and their problems and any barrier issues in terms of apprenticeships. You may be aware that we've already brought in some flexibilities, and we continue to listen to providers and apprentices to see how we can build on our reforms so that the apprenticeships continue to support people from all backgrounds and the economy more broadly. We've implemented a number of major reforms to apprenticeships, and some of them are actually still underway. So does that give you a feel for the sort of thing that I do?
Yes, it does.
Brilliant.
It would be great to kind of expand a little bit more about what you're seeing change during COVID-19 in this landscape.
Okay, cool. So what we're seeing in this landscape is that providers and employers are furloughing apprentices, that apprentices are having a mix of breaks in learning, and one of our issues is really about trying to make sure that those apprentices who are on a break in learning actually don't get too disconnected from the education system, so that when we get into a post-COVID landscape, that they're actually keen and minded to, and have the support of their employer to re-engage and to carry on with their apprenticeship to fill the skills gap that was talked about earlier. So that's really what we're seeing in terms of the mix at the moment. And that's why we're trying to bring in flexibilities to try and do everything that we can to make that happen. And where we find that there are barriers, we really want to collect those in. And I'm more than happy that if you want to give out my work email during part of this, actually as it's being recorded, let me say it. It's Greg with one G at each end, .dean@education.gov.uk. If you have any barriers that you want to make sure that our policy colleagues take on board, please email me and I will. So really that's about where we're at. It's about trying to make sure that the government offers the flexibility and the incentives to make sure that apprenticeships actually fill that skills gap that we'll need for the future to try and combat and mitigate that perfect storm.
That's fantastic work you're doing. Thanks so much, Greg. Tim, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Would you like me to come in at that point?
Yes, please.
So Tim Thomas, work for MakeUK. We're the manufacturers organisation. We represent UK manufacturers across the UK and UK manufacturers increasingly globally. So what are we seeing in terms of COVID-19 and its impact? Well, just to echo some of the points that have been made and enlarge on them, manufacturers, about 3/4 of them generally already invest in high quality apprenticeships. In our sector, an apprenticeship lasts about 4 years duration, so it's a substantial piece of work-based training. Clearly, the apprenticeship programme in our sector and more widely in the economy is coming under great strain, as has been touched upon. So we're seeing a significant drop in plans for apprenticeship starts later this year, so maybe dropping off in our sector by up to half. We're seeing some large apprenticeship providers and some employers that take on large number of apprentices delaying plans, so pushing back a traditional start date in our sector from September perhaps to January. And we're also seeing employers struggle to continue to support apprentices in the way that they would like to. So as has been touched upon, unfortunately some apprentices being made redundant. So what's the response from government and what's the response from manufacturers? Well, clearly what we need to do is make sure that COVID-19 doesn't mean that we don't invest in the skills we need in the future. And those are STEM skills, high-tech skills, those are digital skills that are in short supply in the UK economy. And we want to make sure that COVID-19 doesn't mean that we end up in a situation a year or two time where we are devoid of skills that we're trying to build up. So support for the apprenticeship programme is clearly key. And that needs to be support for employers by government to make sure that they can continue to invest in high quality long-term apprenticeships in the way that they clearly want to. We're also seeing systemic changes in the labour market. As has been touched upon, we're heading towards a situation where we're going to have a new immigration system from the 1st of January next year. Free movement will be brought to an end. That new points-based system employers are going to have to get to grips with. It will hopefully target skills that are in shortage in the UK economy as a whole, but clearly upskilling and retraining the domestic workforce is going to be a key part of that as well. And that will mean more apprenticeships, but also more work-based training that is not necessarily apprenticeship-based. Post-Covid-19 has been touched on. We're anticipating that regrettably there'll be a recession in the UK in all parts. So what we need to do is look at these people who are coming out of perhaps employment at the moment and see how we can support them. There'll be some people who can find jobs with other employers because they've got the skills. There'll be some that can't. So potentially reskilling some of those workers that have some core skills that employers are looking for, but reskilling them with new skills that are in short supply in the UK economy. Government should support that and support training providers to provide that training. And also we should be looking to upskill the domestic workforce. So we've got workers on furlough at the moment, for example. Some will be going back to work, some will be going back to work short time. And there should be an opportunity to make sure that those workers can increase their skills base in a not dissimilar way by government stepping in and funding providers to help with that work-based training that might be based on, for example, elements of a high-quality apprenticeship that some workers would benefit from. So again, I'm thinking of perhaps increasing the digital skills threshold in the UK to make sure that those workers return to work in a position where they can be more productive and more highly skilled. So hopefully that gives you a quick whistle-stop tour around what we're thinking at the moment.
Thanks so much, Tim. I completely agree. I think the government's latest immigration policy announcement really shows a desire to create a high-wage, high-skill economy that makes use of automation, robotics, and other productivity-boosting technologies. But to make a success of this transformation, I think the UK must undergo a kind of reskilling and upskilling revolution. And Chris, what actions do you think employers can take to mitigate the risks of a potentially widening skills gap?
I think for me, the first thing that employers need to do is understand the scale of their challenge. It will be different in different industries, and there will be no one solution that fits all. We've done a lot of work at Network Rail recently to understand our demographics and, more importantly, understand our skills gaps and where we are going to need and what types of skills we are going to need 2, 3, 4 years down the line. Obviously, my area is focused on apprenticeships. So apprenticeships don't fill a skills gap that is occurring now. They fill a skills gap that sits into the future. So I think for me, one of the dangers of the climate that we find ourselves in the moment, that everybody focuses in on the here and the now. And actually the problems will hit us 12, 18 months, 2 years, 3 years down the line. So for me, key thing is that employers need to lift their heads up and look to that future horizon, because if an apprenticeship is a 3-year apprenticeship, the longer we leave it to start developing those skills and upskilling our people and taking advantage of that, the later the benefit comes in the future. So for me, that would be one of the key areas for employers to look at.
And Tim, what do you think government and employers should do to support apprenticeships, building on kind of Chris's answer?
Well, I think there's many employers that are, let's set this in context, there's many employers that are continuing to support apprenticeships anyway. So let's not give anyone the impression that employers as a block have walked away from apprenticeships. They haven't. Most are continuing to support their apprentices and apprenticeships. I think there's 2 issues there. We need to make sure that apprentices in training are supported, and one of the ways we can do that is to support their sponsoring employer to make sure that the employer can continue to support that work-based training. Now, younger apprentices need clearly support from their sponsoring employer. The essence of an apprenticeship, it is work-based training. So should one expect an apprentice to be as productive as a worker that's completed their apprenticeship? So that places a great strain on employers. They need to provide supervision and mentoring and tuition and that training in the workplace. And that clearly is a significant investment by employers. So what could be done? Why don't we provide some greater degree of employer support to make sure that they retain the apprentices in training and don't take some difficult business decisions to reduce or shrink their apprenticeship program? The other thing that can be done is to incentivise employers to take on apprentices in the future. So particularly apprentices in younger age brackets, 16 to 19, for example, it would be a sound decision, MakeUK believe, if government were to provide some additional incentives to employers, particularly small employers, to continue to take on those younger apprentices to provide that work-based training. I mean, essentially what we're talking about is tools that government has used in the past, but actually using them, I think, in probably a more sophisticated way. So government has already provided in the past things called age grants. It's provided national insurance contribution holidays for employers that are taking on apprentices. I think given the challenges we face post Covid-19, those sorts of work-based subsidy schemes to encourage training need to be revisited and probably enlarged. So the biggest employer cost is clearly the apprenticeship wage, followed by the supervision and mentoring cost, and then there's the actual cost of the work-based training itself. And across all those pieces, the government needs to re-evaluate what support they provide employers to make sure that employers can continue to invest in those apprenticeships. I mean, the Prime Minister very recently indicated that he wanted to see a system where all young people were guaranteed an apprenticeship. We would like to see that system as well. There's plenty of young people coming out of formal education that are going to need work-based training. Let's provide greater support for employers who can provide that high quality work-based training that will lead to a better skilled and productive workforce.
Thank you so much. Greg, you previously mentioned kind of the flexibilities in the apprenticeship scheme currently. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, there's a few bits actually. Could I just pick up on those before I go to the flexibilities?
Of course, yeah.
So I think one of the questions earlier online, just to try and build those in, was around sort of STEM and how we encourage people to become apprentices in STEM. We've actually got some apprenticeship ambassadors and they work locally. They're volunteers. They do great work. A lot of them are STEM apprentices. And the idea is that they go out business to business and into schools to try and act as positive role models, to try and encourage people in. So it might be an idea, perhaps if employers wanted to engage with their local apprenticeship ambassadors group to be able to do that might help. Also, as well, if we're talking about training in the future, we need to make sure that we've got an apprenticeship product that is fit for use in that space. And apprenticeship standards are the product. But they're actually, as you now know, employer owned. So we need to make sure that employers actually bite the bullet, and where a specific standard that they need for the future doesn't exist yet, they need to get together and actually create those groups that will enable those standards to be created, so that the providers could come on board and have sufficient time to be able to develop material and deliver them at the right time. In terms of the guarantee that was mentioned and that our Prime Minister talked about, and the Chancellor has already set out that we'll develop sort of new measures to grow the economy, to back business, to boost schools, and to help people thrive in the new sort of post-COVID world. We think apprenticeships are absolutely key to that recovery, especially for young people. And we're looking at providing apprenticeship incentives to employers to encourage them to take on young people as new apprenticeships excuse me, this year, and we'll provide further detail as soon as we can. And in terms specifically about that word guarantee, we will ensure that there is sufficient funding in the apprenticeship system this year to support small businesses wanting to take on an apprentice with money to deliver their training. So that's what the guarantee is all about in that space. Is that okay? I mean, and then in terms of the flexibilities, we have a document that explains this on gov.uk. I think it was last updated on June the 2nd. And again, I can send the link. It's rather a long one to read out, so I won't try it now, but I can send that and you can circulate it later if you want. But in terms of those flexibilities that we've already put in place, we've been encouraging remote delivery of training and allowing changes to endpoint assessments. We've been introducing additional flexibility to allow furloughed apprentices to continue their apprenticeships and undertake endpoint assessments. Where training cannot continue, enabling employers and providers to initiate breaks in learning for apprentices affected by Covid-19, and removing the requirement for level 2 apprentices to work towards or sit their level 2 English and Maths GCSEs or functional skills exams this year. So those are currently the flexibilities that we've worked on in headline terms. Hopefully that answers your questions.
Thank you very much. Chris, what do you see as the barriers for employers utilising this kind of flexibility to close the skills gap?
I think there are several barriers from an employer's point of view. I'm also going to follow Greg's example and try and wrap in a couple of the questions that are in the chat as well. So I'll start off by answering your question, Nimmi, and then come into a couple of those. I think for me, the key barriers that employers face are around regulation and around rigidity. I think touching on Greg, and it's great to hear that the EFSA are looking at those flexibilities and looking at how they can support businesses delivering apprenticeships, and that's exactly what we want to hear. I think there are challenges around 20% off the job learning. I think I'd come back to Tim's point. Apprenticeships by their definition are on the job learning, and I think having that very rigid, you have to be able to evidence that 20% of off the job, I think is scary for some businesses. I think it puts a few people off going down that route. So I think there is some areas there. I think for levy payers, again, the fact that the levy is focused on paying for training, but only training, it can't cover any of the additional costs. Apprentices are fantastic resources and absolutely vital to maintaining skills within industries. I noticed there's a lot of questions coming up on the chat around digital skills and technology skills. I think it's worth noting, particularly for industries like ours, we still rely on electrical engineering and mechanical engineering and the more traditional, if you like, skills. So again, I think there are opportunities to be able to release some of the controls around the levy, which would then help us increase the number of apprentices that we can have and increase the variety of training that we have. I think there is a couple of questions that I'd just like to pick up, if I may, which are related. I think one talks about, should the apprenticeship levy be targeted from 16 to 24-year-olds, and another question says, should we be looking at the older age bracket and not forgetting about those? For what it's worth, I think, and this comes to links in with all of it, we've done a lot of work over the last 3 or 4 years about trying to move the concept of apprenticeships being only for young people to apprenticeships being suitable for everybody to use to reskill, upskill or develop. Tim alluded to it in his piece at the beginning. We are likely to see portions of the workforce losing their roles through redundancy or as a consequence of recession or furlough or whatever that looks like. I think we would be hamstringing ourselves if we chose to only focus the levy on 16 to 24-year-olds, because there is a lot of experience and knowledge that already exists in the market that with the development through an apprenticeship or through a training program of some sort can be repurposed into a different industry. So to answer those two questions, I think I fall more on the side of we should be putting the right people into the right apprenticeship at the right time. Yes, we need to make sure that we are encouraging new talent into it and that young people have the right opportunities, but we can't ignore that older age group where there is benefits to the market as a whole.
Oh, for sure. I think further education has been underfunded for so long. I think we have a chance now to really make an impact and get some money from government on this issue. Tim, bringing you in on this, how important is further education going to be in helping to retrain adults to combat the loss of skills?
Well, the adult education budget is vital. It's vital. So 80% of the people that we need to train are already in employment in the economy as a whole. So whilst manufacturers typically take on apprentices 16 to 18, 16 to COVID-19, having an all-age skills policy is vital to the whole of the UK economy, because over 2/3, 3/4 of the people that we need to train are already in work. So having that consistent program that seeks to upskill and retrain is vital. Just picking up a couple of questions I can see in the chat. The current apprenticeship program is infinitely flexible in as much as it's all ages and all levels. And prior to COVID-19, there were some serious questions being asked whether you could actually have an apprenticeship program on a fixed budget, that is the levy, that provided infinite flexibility in terms of what it offered to individuals and people. So anything from sort of level 2 to level 7 was an apprenticeship, and clearly provided, just picking up some comments here, adult apprenticeships as well. Now, I think the time has come to reevaluate what our apprenticeship program is. I'm not saying that we take anything off the apprenticeship program, but what I am saying is that before COVID-19, let's not forget that the apprenticeship levy fund was on course to be substantially overspent within the near term. Very tricky funding decisions that needed to be made. They haven't gone away, they're still there. And if anything, the apprenticeship levy budget might find itself under greater stress. So we do have some tricky decisions to be made as consumers, training and employers and providers and learners in the UK about how we fund what we need. And clearly what we do need is a blend of training. So in the chat, I see comments about apprenticeships, 20% off the job, difficult to sell. Let's take a slight step back and remember why some of these breaks and apprenticeships are there. And by breaks, I mean requirements. The year and a day rule, 20% off the job there, is there for a good reason. And that's because of some independent reviews that were conducted in the apprenticeship program some years ago. Jason Holt would be one, Doug Ritchie would be another. The apprenticeship program was at risk of being diluted and becoming a program that provided fairly short form work-based training. And there were quite serious questions over the quality of that training. And that's why the apprenticeship program went through the reforms that it's gone through over the last few years, why we've gone from frameworks to standards, why we have the rules, why we got the apprenticeship levy. So lots of things that were done to improve the quality and consistency of apprenticeships. Let us not rush to change any of that. It's been a long, hard road. Around about 3/4 of MakeUK members don't spend, or levy paying members don't spend all their levy. If you're a levy paying MakeUK member, if you can spend half your levy, you're doing well. Most spend less than half their levy because of the funding system, and the remainder goes to non-levy payers and the devolved nations, etc. We all know what the split is of funding. So let's make sure that we continue providing high quality apprenticeships. But what we need, I think, Nimmi, is a blend of all age training. That doesn't mean to say you've got a 20% off the job and it's a year and a day. That's just another tool that we need to add to the apprenticeship program. But very much let's support the apprenticeship program and support the aspiration for it to be high quality work-based training.
Oh, definitely. I think that blended learning is very much needed. Greg, the Department for Education has created this national campaign on kind of apprenticeship ambassadors, trailblazers. How effective do you think that's been in highlighting that an apprenticeship is for everyone at any skill level?
We hope that we've done a good job on it. We've listened to the employers. We're trying to put this in the hands of employers now, rather than sort of it being a government sort of thing that we inflicted on people. And that's why I was saying about the new standards being key. And there's a question on there about how hard's that process? And again, if that person wants to contact me, I'll point them in the right direction and link them in with the Institute to try and help them doing that. I think that I really welcome the comments that I've just heard in terms of it being a quality programme, but just be reassured that absolutely that's at the forefront of our minds. But we are looking at all of those flexibilities to see what we might do in the short term to try and to ease people back in. And the budget pressure absolutely was there. But if we don't measure those breaks in learning back into work, we won't have a budget pressure. We'll actually have the the reverse with insufficient apprentices in the programme. So it's all a bit of a balancing act at the moment. I think the other thing that I'd just like to raise as well that nobody's talked about yet is T-levels. Because people have talked about FE in colleges, and I think that's a place where they can come into their own in terms of T-levels, and actually getting people a taster via that work placement part of T-levels, which you're going to launch in digital in the STEM areas, and that might be a way in to try and get people into now seeing that vocational work is absolutely on a par with academic work. And again, that plays into the all levels programme. By being able to fund up to level 7, you're actually be able to say work-based training now is absolutely comparable to an academic pathway. It's not the poor relation. So we've tried to do everything that we can to actually improve the esteem of the programme. But we're always open to employers and taking on any affordable new ideas.
Oh,
I think,
definitely.
Can I just come back on that,
Of course,
Greg? Just a little bit. There are a couple of questions around T-levels in the box, particularly around how COVID and the current situation might affect placements and whether virtual placements would be acceptable and that sort of thing. I think that's probably a little bit too tricky for us to answer just at this moment. But from an employer's point of view, when it comes to T-levels, we've just spent the last 3 years investing heavily in apprenticeship programs and apprenticeship development. T-levels are coming on, and I can absolutely see the benefit of that program, and I can see where it can be where it can fit in. Question from an employer's point of view, and again coming back to removing barriers. To host placements, there is a cost to the employer, but there is very little perceived benefit, because in effect you're being altruistic towards industry as a whole, because you're taking people into them to seed the market in effect. As we look at that and to encourage, is there any work being done around, again, releasing some levy funds to support employers in being able to provide T-level work placements?
I think I can't specifically announce anything today, obviously, but the idea is that we're actually looking at all the flexibilities. So, comments like that, I've written it down, that will go back to our policy people. If they haven't already thought of it, it'll be in the mix.
That's really interesting. Thank you both. I think that providing that route in for people to engage with T-levels, and not only just employers, is really important. Tim, how do you see kind of the labour market changing in terms of advising students to gather job-specific skills and experience, sometimes 3 years in advance, how we do as employers, kind of looking at skills for the future without a career goal?
I'd come from a slightly different viewpoint. So we talked about apprenticeships a lot on this call, on this webinar. Let's talk about graduates and HE, for example. So apprenticeships are a different form of training because they're work-based. So if you subscribe to an apprenticeship, you know where you're going probably. Well, you should know where you're going because it's work-based and you've got a sponsoring employer. If you're a undergraduate, if you've gone to an HEI, then hopefully you've got some idea of what you want to do with your degree afterwards, because that's why you picked that as a career choice. But what we need to make sure is that undergraduates, students, have perhaps a better idea of where they're going and what their degree can facilitate in the labour market. So take a step back from manufacturing engineering, because those degrees tend to be fairly occupation specific. But what about other students taking other degrees? I think probably the increase in student fees and the labour market changes anyway mean that people are making more informed decisions about what they study, and they're thinking about what career that could lead to in the future. And I think that's to be encouraged. What we'd also want to do is making sure that there are closer links between universities and employers. So employers can help inform universities and students about what their requirements are to make sure that students come out with some of the key skills that they are looking for. Some of the comments from our members are that apprentices are more ready for work than students are. And that's because they've gone through a long period of work-based training. And some of our members even prefer to recruit apprentices rather than students because they're more productive. And there will be typically student graduate training programs. And some of those training programs actually in our sector borrow material from the apprenticeship program. So I think what I'm saying is it's a blend. Clearly we need a blend in the labour market, but perhaps in terms of higher education, that blend needs to focus a little more closely on employer need and what students are going to need to pursue a career within a particular sector, and to make sure that their degree is relevant to that.
Definitely. Chris, how will we develop skills and employability if there's no vaccine for COVID-19 for 2-3 years potentially? And will we have lost a generation?
I think that's a really good question. I think first of all, the question around how do we develop skills and employability? Well, the vast majority of training providers and ourselves included, we made a very quick pivot into the world of digital delivery and remote delivery for everything that could be done in that way. We've spent the last 3 months looking at how we reintroduce technical skills training in a classroom or a face-to-face environment, and like most businesses, we have found ways of being COVID secure through the use of PPE, through the use of social distancing. So I think we will be okay is the short answer. We will find a way to continue to deliver those skills in a world if a COVID vaccine isn't produced. It may be smaller class sizes. It may take a longer period of time to deliver it, but I think we will adapt and overcome from that side. Will we lose a generation? I think that's a really interesting question. I was talking to a colleague yesterday, and we're in a position at the moment where the only formally assessed qualifications that are taking place at the moment are apprenticeships, because GCSE exams haven't taken place, A-level exams haven't taken place, end-of-year university exams in some cases haven't taken place, but endpoint assessments still are taking place for apprenticeships. So we could be in a position actually where apprenticeships now really start to stand up, because it is an assessed qualification based on everything that we've done. So I'm not sure that we will lose a generation. I think what we will gain is a different way of doing things, and this may be the point in time where we really make that break which this country has had for a long time about its academic first and vocational second. This may be the opportunity we have to say that actually academic and vocational sit side by side.
Yeah, that's definitely really interesting. Tim, could you come in on this point as well? It'd be great to understand, whether or not you think we've potentially lost a generation and what more we can do for the training and upskilling of our current generations.
Well, as I've said, I mean, the majority of people that we need to upskill and retrain are already in the workforce. I don't think we lost a generation. What we face are challenges, and these are quite long-term challenges in the UK skills landscape. So we've had a lot of initiatives over a lengthy period of time. I've mentioned the apprenticeship changes as one. We've got T-levels to embed as well. We've got traineeships. We've got the adult skills budget and changes to adult skills generally. We've got the changes to frameworks, from frameworks to standards for apprenticeships. So a lot that's gone on in England. Remember that skills is a devolved issue. We haven't yet touched on that. So remember that the skills landscape in England is not the same as the landscape elsewhere. So what we need, and what we've fought for many years, and looking at some of the questions in the chat box, is something that is far more grown up and holistic. So what we need is something that looks at what people in school learn, and what we teach people in school, what careers we expose them to make sure that they realise that the subjects that they are learning in school have an application in the real world, and that they make informed career choices, and that there's a good blend of vocational education training, which is of high quality, and formal education, academic education, and that people can choose either. That's one of the premises behind T-levels. and make sure that people continue that through their working careers, and that everyone, employers are incentivized and workers are incentivized to make sure that they keep their skills up to date and current throughout their working lives. So that, I think that's partly the challenge of the UK labour market. I think let's not get carried away. There are some really good practice in the UK and some really good examples of high quality workplace learning, high quality academia. There are universities, certainly in our sector, that partner with our members to provide an excellent blend between academic learning and practical application, on our members sharing facilities with universities so that students can see firsthand what the latest technology is in robotics and cobotics, for example. So some fantastic practice that is going on. So let's not think that we're not doing it. I think we're just not doing it in a joined-up fashion or in the quantity that we need to provide the skills the UK labour market is going to need, not now, but we're talking 5 or 10 years hence, and that should be our time horizon. You know, let's remember that train an apprentice in our sector 4 years, 3 years for a student, maybe 2 years, before they finally find that they are a highly productive worker. So our time horizon needs to be in excess of 5 years if we're to make sure that we supply what we need in the labour market over that period.
Great, thanks. And Greg, just building on kind of the stuff that Tim has said, how do we build on the fantastic work that has already been done with apprenticeships and kind of other vocational education?
I think, to be honest, we continue to listen to employers. They're the people who actually have the problems that they want to solve with a more skilled workforce. We want them to be innovative. We want them to strike out and make our nation as productive as it possibly can. So we have to, basically, as a government, not intervene when we're not wanted to, but to make sure that we intervene and support employers deliver what they need by giving them what they need when they need it, and by making sure that there's sufficient funding there to ensure that there's a mix of products, but that it's quality provision that underpins it all.
Yeah, and I think kind of the upskilling piece is all really linked to that, and so is the careers guidance. You know, we've got a question from the chat saying that a lack of careers guidance is a major issue. How do you predict what skills are needed for jobs that may not yet exist due to being partly automated or kind of looking at a new job market? Chris, what would you say that is the responsibility of employers and government to do so?
In terms of career advice and how you do it, it's a really good question, and I am going to put my hand up and say I can see this from both sides of the fence, because before I was with Network Rail, I spent 10 years teaching secondary, and I've sat there as a teacher and been asked to provide careers advice about things that I know very little about. And similarly, I'm now asked in as an employer to go into schools and talk to students about careers they're not interested in. It's 6 to 1 and half a dozen of the other. For me, careers professionals, and that's what they are. Careers advisors are key professionals in helping us to fill skills. The fact is that in my experience, nobody leaves school wanting to be a project manager. Nobody leaves school wanting to be a strategist. People leave school wanting to be what they can see: doctors, nurses, police officers, politicians. You know, and I think for me, and I've picked this up from some of the questions, I think there needs to be more investment in the career services that are available within schools, and then they need to be the link between the employers and the schools. Employers do a good job, I think, in the pockets where they have influence, and most organisations will have their teams and will have people who work for them that will go out and do that outreach work and explain to young people what career options are available. But ultimately, we're not professionals, and we can talk to what we know, but we can't talk wider than that. So for me, I think one of the things that we will need to invest in is high quality careers advice and let those professionals, give them the space and the support that they need to be able to do their jobs.
Yeah, and that career advice is not only just for students, but I guess to inform parents as well. Greg, we've got a question here kind of asking what will be done to inform parents about the value of apprenticeships? Of course, we've got this national campaign. Is there anything else that government is doing or looking to do, perhaps?
I think the Fire It Up campaign is where we go with this. You might have seen the adverts sort of in cinemas as well, and we've had posters on buses and all of that sort of thing. We are trying to sort of captivate the younger person's imagination. And the other thing that I would advocate for is to go take your kids to the skills show. If you've ever been to one of those at the NEC or in London, they're fantastic. One of the things that I lead on is the public sector. So I managed to get ambulances there, fire crews there, a fire engine there. As the colleague said earlier, it's about things that they can see, that they're tangible, that they understand, or that they think they understand, and that they want to be associated with. So I think that's an important thing that we can do in terms of communicating. Those skills shows are a really good focus. And
Tim, sorry, would anyone like to come in on that?
I was just one quick thing as well. There was a question in about how do they find their apprenticeship ambassador for their area. So just drop me an email. I'll join you up with the chair of the local group.
Oh, that's fantastic. We'll put your email into the comments of the web chat very soon. Tim, this kind of inspiring people into certain careers, how have you seen it work from an employer side? You know, what more can employers do?
Employers need to work with their local schools more. So for our members, it is a key way in which they raise the profile of our sector and seek future potential apprentices. I mean, we are an apprenticeship service provider ourselves. So we open our centre every year. We have about 250 young people from schools that come in. We run events in the heart of the country to showcase what manufacturing engineering can provide. But all employers can do something. There's the Careers and Enterprise Company, for example, you can get involved with, and they will assist you in going into your local school and just raising awareness of what your business can offer. Now, this might seem very intangible to many employers. It might seem an investment that you don't know what the return is, but you're not going to inspire anyone to join your business at some point in the future unless you open their eyes to what you can provide. Now, yes, careers guidance and inspiration can always be better in schools, and I'm not sure we ever had a golden age of careers guidance in schools. However, there's no help like self-help. So get involved with your local school if you're an employer listening. Go to someone like the CEC or contact Greg and find a STEM ambassador, for example, and really engage with your local school just around about where you are. So various research that shows that actually schools don't really know the businesses and that surround them. They don't actually know what local businesses have to offer. And bear in mind, schools are there to provide education. They're not there necessarily to open people's eyes up to what careers they're going to pursue after they gain that formal education. So I think the answer is just to help and support and invest that time. Many of our members say they've done so and they find it a frustrating process. You might find it a frustrating process, even though we've got members who actually support local academies financially and have done so and reap the rewards of that in later years. So depending on what size you are as an employer, you can always do something.
Just to finish off, because we've only got 4 minutes now, it's been a fantastic discussion. What more would you want from government over the next kind of short to medium term to alleviate impacts of COVID-19? You know, from techUK's perspective, I think more should be and can be done on the upskilling furloughed workers piece. Of course, that's a point for employers as well to get involved, but employers have been training their own staff for a long time, kind of using that internal training and vocational training such as apprenticeships. I think we've seen real impact with the skills toolkit that the government launched, which signposted to different initiatives, a massive amounts of uptake. And I think if we can find a way to join that together and alleviate the digital skills partnership, we might be on something. But I'd really like to know what more can we do in the short to medium term to help us build our recovery and I guess build the momentum from the fantastic initiatives that have taken place during COVID-19. Chris, I'll come to you first.
Just a short question then to finish. For me, I'll keep this really simple. I think for me, from a governmental point of view, it is clarity and speed. We need to have clear direction about what is going to be available and how we can apply that. I think from an employer's point of view, I think it's that old adage, the first thing that tends to get cut in times of recession is training and development. And I am a great believer in the fact that that should be the last thing to get cut. So for me, clarity and speed of response from government and from employers, investment, and look to the future when it comes to developing people. Don't necessarily look at the next 6 months.
Very, very true. Skills policy is always the quite difficult one because it's a long-term issue, but we need short-term answers and, I guess, impact. Greg, I'm wondering if you could answer the same question.
It's hard for me to say that, isn't it, really? Because, we are listening to the employers. We want to make sure we do all the right things. It's in the Chancellor's hands, I guess, to announce what further support must come, because it must be affordable. But we are working on all of the flexibilities that might be in the basket of things that we might offer up. I've written down every word that an employer has said in terms of what sort of things that they think they need, and I'll make sure they're in the basket for consideration.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Greg. I think it's been so important, the work that the agency has been doing in order to provide flexibilities, not only for employers, but for apprentices, to make this tough and difficult situation work for both. Tim, what do you see happening in the short term, or maybe you'd like to expand to the long term?
I'll stick to short term. So in the wake of COVID-19, what we need is to take what we've got already, which is a suite of high quality technical training courses within an apprenticeship, take the elements that we can out of that and we can deliver them within a sort of 3 or 4 month package and deliver those quickly to people that need upskilling and retraining in the domestic labour market. So given where we are with COVID-19, take what we've got, use the existing high quality provider network that quite frankly needs support at the moment as well, and make sure that we pump prime a future skills training revolution by using what we already have and not trying to create anything new.
Oh, for sure. Building on what we already have. That's absolutely fantastic. I just want to say a huge thanks to our panelists for providing us with great insights that we're going to go away and turn over. And to all of you for joining us this now afternoon. I believe that we have a few more comments from our GovNet organisers, but I just wanted to say that please do feel free to harass our speakers or contact via LinkedIn, or as Greg has dropped his email in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you to you all. I just wanted to come in there before you all go off. So I'd like to say thank you to Nimmi Patel, Greg Dean, Chris Shirley and Tim Thomas for taking the time out this afternoon to answer some of your questions. I'm sure you'd all agree that it's been a super interactive and kind of interesting debate. Any reports and resources that were mentioned will be shared to you all after this, as well as the webinar recordings. So before you all go off, we would love to continue the conversation. So please do complete the exit poll before you exit. But thank you again so much for your time, and please do all stay safe and stay well until next time. Goodbye, everyone.
Cheers.